Okay, folks, it's just a minute or two after 2 o'clock where I am today. I want to welcome everyone. This is the grand experiment. I and my senior team have been looking forward to spending some time with you. We've got over 100 people registered, and they probably be continuing to join in the next few minutes. But I want to take a few minutes and thank you for joining us. This is the first of what we hope will be 3 successful discussions via the web. As I said, we've got a large number of folks joining us today from all over the country, representatives from schools like Nebraska and Clemson and Butler and Georgia Tech, Marquette, St. John's, Northwestern, SMU, Michigan State, just to mention a few, including a few from Division II and Division III. All of us, I think, are interested in career development and making sure we're on top of the issues in college athletics. And so we thought we would do this to take advantage of this time when a lot of us are working remote, to think about some things that we normally don't think about when we're busy every single day. So thanks for joining us today. I'll introduce the members of my team in just a minute, but a couple of ground rules as we go through this. We have the ability to mute the mics, and so we'll try to do that from our end. If the technology somehow doesn't work, you can mute your own mic, and we ask you to do that. If you would like to make a comment, you can click the chat icon. Most of our platforms, it's on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and in doing that, you can comment or or ask a question. Another way to do it is also to hold down your space bar on your computer if you're there with your laptop or on your computer. If a lot of people start talking, it'd probably be helpful if you can click the raise your hand icon. And when you do that, our team will then call upon you to answer a question, and that'll give us some way to sort of keep order as we go along. When you speak, and we hope you will, otherwise you're going to be really bored listening to me all afternoon. So we want this to be interactive, but please, when you speak, introduce yourself and give your institution and possibly your position, at least the first time that you talk. So those are a bit of our ground rules for today. Again, we would like this to be as informal and interactive as we possibly can. You know, this is a big call, and so we may step on one another, but we're going to learn how to use this technology. I think all of us are very capable of doing it. I also would like to reference a document that I sent to you, or my staff did yesterday, which is a PowerPoint. We actually started thinking about this presentation, and we put this very lengthy, detailed PowerPoint together that addressed a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about today. So rather than go through that point by point, we thought we'd send that to you in advance. And those of you who had it, I hope you'll get access to it and reference it during our call today. What we intended to do, though, was to really engage in a discussion today of some of those items, sharing some of our perspectives, some of which are laid out pretty carefully on the document we previously received, but also opening the floor up to questions and comments by some of you. On the screen, you see our team. We've got Brad Bates and I both are former athletics directors. Between us, we've probably got, I don't know, Brad, we've probably got over 100 years of experience between us working on campuses. So we've seen a lot. We don't have all the answers. We certainly have experienced quite a bit, but we're joined too by 2 young members of our staff, Drew Turner, who is the former Associate Athletic Director at Old Dominion and worked in advancement and development there and also at Duke. And then Clay Pfeifler. Clay is the guy behind the curtain that makes all this happen. He's our Research Associate, Director of Operations, and will be helping us with any technical issues that might pop up today. So that's our team. A little bit about Collegiate Sports Associates. I think some of you know who've known me for a long time. After leaving campus and founding CSA in 2010, boy, we've had a a lot of work over the period of time, much great surprise to me. But what we've discovered is that there is a need for sometimes outside perspectives, sometimes from people who have actually spent time in the industry. We've had, as you see, 85 different institutions, conferences at every level ask us to do work for them. Probably our main business is in the area of searches, and we've done well over 100 of those at this point for ADs, coaches, senior administrators. And then we also are much engaged in our consulting projects dealing with strategic planning, program reviews, et cetera. Brad Bates actually runs our consulting division. Brad has his PhD from Vanderbilt and 2 terms as a Division I athletics director. He brings a lot of experience and knowledge to what we do. So that's a little bit about who we are. All of my team is on the line today and available for comments and questions. So let's get started. Any questions before we do? Comments from my guys? Anything? All right, our goal is to make this fun. So if you have even creative questions or unique ideas, please share them. Let's make this an enjoyable afternoon together. I sent you some homework, as I mentioned earlier. The first part of that listed 20 game changers that has happened in my career, some of which are currently ongoing. Those were listed in orange if you've got that slide handy. But there are things like the advent of Title IX to the creation of the APR to the huge coaches' salaries. I mean, there have been some landmark things that have happened in my career that if I had been really spent the time thinking about them, they may have changed some of the way I prepared myself and did business going forward. So I just mentioned that because I think it's important for us to really take a good look, first and foremost, at what happened before and kind of where we are, which means what does this current landscape look like? I sent information that dealt with our governance model, the finances, what's going on in college football, what are our student athletes facing today, and then of course we've got the current pandemic crisis that we really want to talk about before we get off the phone today, at least a little bit. And then lastly, as promised, we're going to take a glimpse at what could be in our future. So questions or comments about any of your homework assignment? Hopefully you had a chance to get that. If you didn't receive it, if you'll send us an email, we'll send you that entire presentation. Okay? All right, so here's some important questions for us to consider today. What's the future holding for intercollegiate athletics? How is your institution going to be impacted? And in particular, what about your role as an administrator or leader in this profession? What are you going to be doing in this changing landscape, and how can you secure that position and be a leader in the future with this particular enterprise? So hopefully our discussion today will help you answer some of those questions. So we've got 5 overarching topics that we've organized today's discussion by governance, student athlete issues, financial sustainability, football federation, and lastly, the pandemic. So that's what we'll be doing going forward. So I want to spend a minute and talk a little bit about governance. I want to begin there because I think there have been some historical issues that need our attention. You know, we ask ourselves, what's driving the questions about the way we manage ourselves? The NCAA is our administrative organization. Each of our schools is the NCAA. They simply administer what we as institutions tell them we'd like for them to do. Now, you know, there are things that the NCAA could do better, and if you've got your slides there in front of you, you will know, for instance, if you look at slide 9, 10, 11, The NCAA has achieved a lot. I made a list there. Great championships. Academic standards are better than they've ever been. We've improved athletes' experiences and benefits, and we've got a significant growth in participation in athletics. But the model's failed in many ways. We got rising costs. We've got divided membership. We've got court challenges, underappreciated, ineffective enforcement system, higher coaches' salaries, antiquated amateurism model messaging of our mission and unique purpose has been all but absent. So our governance model currently has really, I think, in many ways, run its course. And it's time for maybe some changes to modernize that. Our way of dealing with things, as I put in what I sent you yesterday, is really our strategy has been kind of whack-a-mole. You know, when a problem emerges, we really just react to it as opposed to having a consistent laid out plan, a vision for where we're trying to go as a industry and a plan to try to get us there. So we're really missing that clear and concise, universally embraced set of core values and guiding principles. You know, there's not a platform for comprehensive reform. It's just been whack-a-mole. So I think from a governance standpoint, we've got some challenges that lie ahead of us. What are driving these challenges? In my mind, the financial imbalances that exist in division, among the divisions, creating the haves and have-nots have been a main contributor to the drivers behind governance and changes that may be required. And heck, the federal government, our state governments are now taking an interest in the way we're managed. And then of course, the media and general public have opinions about that. So to me, those are some of the drivers. If I missed any, if someone would be glad to share them, I'd love to hear from you. So jump in at any time. Then I asked the question on the slide you see in front of you, what should be our priorities? Talk to me about that. I'm going to ask Brad Bates to make a comment about priorities that could be foundational for us in terms of putting our governmental structure together. Brad, you want to comment?
Sure. Well, the United States, as everyone knows, is one of the few countries in the world that integrates our athletics with our educational systems. And I can make a very compelling argument that the way the rest of the world is doing it may be a better system. There's no opportunity for compromise, no compromised admissions, no compromised rigor of curricula, no compromised consequences for bad judgment and bad behavior. And so I think when you focus on priorities, our focus always has to be, especially within an educational system, how do we maximize the development of student athletes? And so the overarching question we should always be asking ourselves relative to any policy decisions that we make, in what ways does this help our students grow?
That's great, Brad. I totally agree with that. I also listed, you know, that our priorities should be, in terms of governance, providing services and support to the membership and running championships and ensuring fair competition. And that's by doing things like running eligibility, assessing compliance, providing championships in all sports. So our governing organization should do that, but to ensure our future and our sustainability and to make sure that whatever we do is fair, I think the NCAA and our industry, I don't want to lay it all on the NCAA, but I think we as leaders in the industry have really done a very, very poor job of telling the story about intercollegiate athletics and what it means and how helpful it can be to our students. So, you know, I think we need to spend time messaging our values and what principles that make us different than professional sports, as an example. You know, what's the mission of higher ed and athletics? How does it all fit together? Where are the alignments? What's the value to our students on participation in college athletics?
So real quick, we've got a question from Mike Castle.
Mike?
Hey, Todd, it's Mike from Georgia Tech. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Not so much a question at all. I think what I'm feeling is there's a disconnect between the values you're mentioning and the values that all of us as administrators are bought into, and the perception or the buy-in from the end consumer of our product, right? The people who are watching on TV and they're buying into what we're selling on the media. I don't know that they believe in the core values the same way we do. And that's a disconnect that I think we have to figure out how to overcome. We're asking these folks to come spend their time with us and spend their money with us, but they're doing it from an entertainment and from a wins losses standpoint. But I don't know that the mission or the values that we believe in are getting passed along to them in terms of their belief system.
Mike, I couldn't agree with you more, and I really do appreciate that comment. I think that's where we fail, and I think you, as young administrators, and people that are going to go in this industry, should take that to heart and figure out how can we be consistent in our message and drum it into people's heads that we are not like the NBA or the NFL. We play the games, but we've got a different set of priorities and core values. You can never separate athletics from its entertainment value, but you certainly can distinguish how you got where you are and who the kids are that are representing, that are providing that kind of benefits. Great comment. I appreciate that. Let me refer you to slide number 15 in the previous deck that I sent to you yesterday. There's an interesting list of things there that I think are missed when we try to message the value of the student athlete experience. I listed several of them. There are 460,000 participants in college athletics that have great experiences. Their academic success exceeds that of the rest of the student body. Access to their educational experience in some cases may be only possible because they are playing sports. College sports has provided incredibly enhanced campus diversity, and not only in terms of gender and race, but also in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds and just even international students. And I think this is important. This is a message that I sent this to Clark Emmert some time ago and suggested that they start to use data like this in their messaging. Didn't get much response from that, but there was a study done at the Center for Research in Intercollegiate Athletics at the University of North Carolina, of which Clay Pfeiffer, who's on the call with us, was a part of. And what the study determined was that among the Power 5 institutions that were surveyed, the value of the services and opportunities provided to student athletes was significant. For an in-state institution, for instance, an in-state student, the value of what they received as a student athlete was $58,000. This is in 2018 dollars. $78,000 if you were from out of state. And if you were at a school like Notre Dame or Duke, it was $100,000 or just about. And the interesting thing is, that's tax-free dollars. If you were to buy that, that's tax-free. So I tried to put that in perspective. What does a college graduate, first year out of college, average in salary? And the number is right at $50,000 based on the research I did. And those dollars are taxed. So just from a financial standpoint, the benefits that accrue our student athletes are significant. And we've missed the opportunities to sell that. And so I challenge you as future leaders and current leaders to figure out how you're going to message this in such a way that it does in some way change public opinion about what college athletes are all about and what kind of value they're getting from their experience. In my opinion, I don't think they're getting exploited nearly as much as some do, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Let me stop there and open the floor to any questions or thoughts or comments, even from my own team. Okay. Well, the hot topic going forward, particularly as it relates to student athletes, there are two of them. One deals with name, image, and likeness, and the other with the current issues regarding transfer waivers and the transfer portal. Just from my perspective, part of my work today involves some consulting work with the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. For those of you who are not familiar with Knight Commission, it was founded in the early 1990s to help restore the balance between higher ed and athletics, to make sure that presidents were in control. The Knight Commission has been active for a long time. There are a number of legacy people that are involved in it, including current and former presidents, the president at Penn State, the president at Arizona State, Paul Harrison, who was a former president at Hartford and led the NCAA Academic Reform Group, David Robinson, the legendary basketball player, Lynn Elmore, who played basketball in Maryland as a television personality, and so on and so forth. So it's a high-profile group that's a think tank. And part of their work recently has been trying to understand what is this thing called name, image, and likeness, and how is it going to impact our world moving forward. And it's complicated. Everybody in America, we live in a country where your right of publicity is an inalienable right. College athletes have been asked historically to assign that right during their term of play to the institutions where they are enrolled. The new initiative is to give students the right now to take control of their name, image, and likeness and use it for their own benefit, commercial purposes, outside of their identity as a college athlete. And so this name, image, and likeness was originally intended to give students the right to create a business, to make endorsements, to use their role as influencers on social media, to monetize that in some way, to give them the same rights that other students on campus have. But at the same time, protecting the institution's name, its trademarks, its logos from being commercialized without their agreement. So that's kind of what name, image, and likeness is all about. I want to ask the group, what kind of preparation do you think our students have had relative to name, image, and likeness? And it isn't even an issue on your campus. Let me hear from you.
Todd, I'd like to go to, this is Drew Turner, I'd like to go to Eric Rodell, who's on the call. Eric's at the University of Oregon, and I'm sure they're dealing with this issue in Eugene. Eric, would you provide some perspective from the Oregon Ducks?
Sure. Appreciate the opportunity, and name, image, likeness has certainly been front and center now for a few months for all of us, and with COVID-19 and everything that's going on, it almost seems like a distant memory, but it's certainly not going away. As Todd mentioned, it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot happening with name, image, and likeness that we're all seeing through the media reports, but it's happening at a federal level, at a state level, at an NCAA level, at a conference level, and certainly locally on our campus. And so for us, I'd say it really comes down to three things: education, communication, and then engagement. And, for us, we've tried to educate ourselves as a leadership team as best we can by following what's happening and among all those different constituencies out there, and then trying to filter that information back to our coaches and to our student athletes. And when us as administrators are having a hard time following it and understanding exactly what name, image, and likeness is, it's even that much more difficult for coaches and for student athletes. So we've done the best job we can trying to assimilate all that information that's out there. And then, on the local level, having those meetings with our coaches, working closely with our SAC and with our student athlete leaders to give a sense of what's happening and what name, name, image, likeness is and how it can impact them. The second thing, communication, again, it just comes back to continuing to be proactive at every level. And that's been from our president to our athletic director. I've been pretty closely involved with it as well, and keeping our coaches and our student athletes informed with all the movement that's been happening, and engagement. There's been a lot of opportunity for all of us to be engaged when it comes to name, image, and likeness. I actually had an opportunity back in January to sit alongside Scott Barnes, the athletic director at Oregon State, with our state legislatures, who proposed a bill which actually did not move all the way through the legislature. But as they were drafting that bill, they wanted to hear from us. And that was a great opportunity for us to sit and walk them through what it's like to be a Division I student athlete, and the types of things that we're doing to provide a great student athlete experience. And, for all of us to have that opportunity to do that, up through our state leaders and up to the federal level, that's really the way that we're going to try to, shift the conversation and the narrative so that people do have an accurate understanding of what's going on out there in the intercollegiate athletics enterprise. Another piece of that is we had a student athlete from Oregon State who sat and testified in front of our state legislatures about her experience as a student athlete and what she felt like name, image, and likeness meant to her as a student athlete. And she was representing the Pac-12 student athlete leadership group. So there's been a lot of engagement from student athlete level, administrator level, and certainly athletic directors and presidents. But again, education, communication, and engagement are the things that we've found to be most important as we all try to find a national solution that creates a pathway for student athletes to have access to name, image, and likeness, but again, with the appropriate guardrails so that we can preserve this special collegiate model that we're all a part of. So that's just a little context for what we've seen out here at Oregon and what we've been trying to do to keep people engaged and informed.
Hey, Eric, thanks. That's terrific. I'll ask you a question. You've got one of the most highly visible women athletes or collegiate athletes on your campus in Sabrina Ionescu. Has she or others that are at her level of public visibility, are they aware of this opportunity, and have you talked to them about it, and what do they say?
Well, Sabrina is certainly a unique example, and the timing of this was, interesting because we actually worked with Nike to develop a unisex number 20 jersey, and she was actually a part of that process, developing that jersey. We had not worked with Nike and some of the retail outlets before on a women's basketball number jersey, but Sabrina is so popular, and she was dialed into this and was all for it. But name, image, and likeness certainly touched her this year, and she developed a very strong understanding of really the type of pull and value that she has in the marketplace. By the end of the basketball season, you would look around at our men's basketball games and you would see several hundred sometimes individuals wearing a number 20 Sabrina jersey, which was really interesting for us. And again, we had Justin Herbert on the football team as well, who is a highly visible student athlete. And we've had these conversations with our student athletes to get their sense of it. And certainly student athletes are, interested in this, and they feel like it's an opportunity for them. And what we've tried to do is educate that this does not mean all student athletes are being paid by the university. It does not mean that all student athletes are going to receive a sponsorship just as a right for being a student athlete. This is going to be more market driven. based off the desires of third parties who are out there, and it's going to be something that's hopefully regulated and controlled in the right way. But certainly those student athletes who are the most visible on our campus have developed a keen understanding of what NIL may mean for them.
You know, some of the discussions that I've had with student athlete folks really focus more on their using their social media presence to monetize that in some way. That's a new element for those of us who've been in this industry for a really long time. But I do believe that helping your students figure out how to manage that, and also how to navigate, in some cases, external recruitment from agents and third parties to try to represent them. That's part of the educational process. I think institutions are going to have to figure out, how are you going to teach your students to manage this, and what kind of assistance can you provide for them going forward from here? You know, there are also some potential financial challenges to the institution. It may change your financial model a little bit. Has anybody out there thought about that? For instance, if one of your students is allowed to have a competing promotional arrangement that competes with one of your exclusive sponsors. The state of California prohibited that in the legislation they drafted, but there may be others.
Oh,
yeah, we have a question.
we do. Janet at UNC Asheville.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about this name, image, and likeness from our perspective at the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and particularly with our men's basketball program. Through the years, we've had some really good Division I men's basketball players who end up transferring. I think we'll end up having more of that if they think that they can go to another bigger school that's more high profile, where they can benefit from name, image, and likeness. So I think for mid-majors, you know, your second thing on here, transfer policies, I think that actually could make that one of those kind of things that more and more of the student athletes say, well, if I can transfer to Baylor using one of our former student athletes, and I'm seeing a lot more, I might have an opportunity to have more of this name, image, and likeness than I would if I was at UNC Asheville. So I see these two things playing off of each other.
Yeah, you know, Janet, that's a great comment. And I do think it sort of can all be circled up under student athlete rights and issues that are changing as our culture is modernized. And there are unintended consequences that are going to emerge out of this that we're going to have to figure out how to manage, one of which would be how is this going to impact the transfer rules, because they all sort of fit together. I want to go back and ask again, have any of you considered how this might change your financial modeling? Because I do think it could be possible for a student athlete to develop an arrangement with a competing sponsor or even one of your current sponsors, and they elect, instead of paying the institution, they elect to sign a deal instead with a highly visible athlete, which could have some financial implications.
Hey, Todd, it's John Steinbrecher.
Hey, John. Thanks for joining. John is the commissioner of the Mid-American Conference.
Talked about that specific issue both with our student athletes and with our administrators, and obviously we're all just kind of spitting into the wind here about what the possibilities are. But certainly a scenario you walk through are what's managed or what's being talked about under the state laws. Could there be conflicts or not? And will the ultimate policies that come through govern that to prevent those situations? But then it's the closer to home things are there going to be sponsors who, rather than doing whatever they do with your athletics program, would they rather just somehow, in essence, underwrite 3 promotional deals with student athletes? And does that cause a problem to your ability to underwrite the total program? I think in my discussions with our student athletes, they get that, and that's of interest to them, and that's of concern to them, which isn't to say that if Joe's Pizza Shop comes and offers them a promotional deal that is permitted under whatever the guidelines, that they wouldn't take it. And then the administrators, certainly anything that in theory diminishes their ability to generate revenue, you can't help but wonder. So it's just, I guess I would list it as another stressor that's out there, another unknown that we'll see what happens.
I couldn't agree with you more. And Janet sort of touched on this too, John. The transfer policy, it really ends up being a fairness and a competitive issue, because you can see if you don't have guardrails that manage booster involvement, you can see how the NIL rules and regulations could lend itself to competitive advantages that are unfair, both in recruiting and in maintaining your current level of athlete, whether it be providing them with a broader online presence or a car dealer in your community who wants to provide a vehicle for someone to drive if they make a couple of appearances at their dealership. So this is a very complex issue. I think the point of all this is that as administrators going forward, looking into the future, learning how to manage name, image, and likeness, and also having your input into what the rules and guardrails should be is going to be absolutely critical. I know Gene Smith and Val Ackerman are chairing the NCAA's committee on this, and they're struggling with it. But they're due to report something out to the NCAA's Board of Governors in late April, and it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. I will tell you that groups like the Drake Group and the Knight Commission too are going to weigh in on this and provide some of their own opinions and ideas about future guidelines. So I want to keep your eyes open for that. I do want to talk about transfers a little bit. I've been really, as an outsider now looking at the transfer issue, I've been really concerned about how this impacts things like roster management and recruiting in general. I know Wood Seelig has done a lot of thinking about the transfer thing. Wood is the athletic director at Old Dominion. Wood, are you on the line?
I am. I'm right here, Todd. Yes, sir.
You want to talk a little bit about your thoughts about the transfer issues and how that impacts a school like Old Dominion?
Yeah, transfers, the way I've talked to our coaches about it is depending on what is ultimately determined. Is it going to be a one-time, everyone gets a, get out of jail free, or how is it ultimately going to work? Maybe I'm looking at it, incorrectly, but I think we're kind of in the middle. We're not certainly at the top in the Power Five, and we're not certainly at the bottom. I think those of us who are in the middle could be in a sweet spot per se. I mean, we very well may lose some of our best athletes who want to move up, but then again, and like Janet said, with the name, image, and likeness, they may see greener fields of opportunity at the Power Five level, so that may come to fruition and hurt us. But I think ultimately we could get more who transfer down for want of playing time, and others who transfer up who may not be able to get to that, upper echelon Power Five level. So I think we could be, and this might be naive, as I said, but I think we could be in that sweet spot. But I don't disagree with the industry opening up the conversation and the philosophy more to receptivity of transfer, because in this day and age of all the litigation that is ongoing, I think this is an area that is ripe for future student athlete litigation if we don't at least try and get it right and make some amendments to what the policies are on the books at this time. So that's just my personal feeling, talking to our coaches and some administration, and then I'll be happy to chime in later too on this sixth year in the spring and winter sports, because we've got some observations there. But ultimately, I do want to say thank you, Todd, to you and your team, because, in this time of telework and telecommute, we have been challenged as a staff, whether it's athletics, whether it's academic, whether it's administrative. Our administration, upper level administration, has challenged all of us to use time wisely, and in the event we can't fill it with what we might do normally during a work day from 8 to 5 and beyond, they've suggested that we seek ways to improve ourselves via professional development. So, calls like this, agendas like this, groups such as those that we've gathered here today, I think helps us accomplish that professional development with an eye toward fiscal responsibility, since we're all doing it, right from the comfort of our own home offices, or if anyone happens to still be on a campus, congratulations there. But I think it really helps us to accomplish that and continue our networking and growth. So I appreciate the conduit that you and your team have provided today and going forward for these opportunities.
Well, we enjoy doing it. I think these are most valuable when folks like you and others that are on the line participate and also contribute to the conversation. Our opinions are our goal here is to really act as facilitators as much as anything else. But I do appreciate your comments. Brad Bates and I have talked several times about the transfer environment. And as an old school guy, I always thought the simple solution to the transfer issue was that in every sport, every student athlete sat their first year, no matter what, no waivers whatsoever. I've even gotten to the point where I would say maybe the first time you transferred and you sat out, you got to have your clock extended by a year so that you didn't lose that year of eligibility. I thought that was academically sound. Now, John Steinbrecher is on the line with us, and John's chairing the NCAA's committee on this transfer issue. Truth in lending, I spoke to him earlier this week and asked him if he would participate in the call. And I think appropriately, he said, I'd rather be a good listener and hear what other people had to say about the transfer policy. So, John, that's my contribution. I think everybody ought to sit a year and then have their clock extended. Brad had an even better idea. Brad, you want to talk about that?
Well, I had a couple crazy ideas. One was every coach should have to sit out a year unless they've been in an institution 4 years before they leave and go take another job. But over in Europe, there's actually a model for several of their leagues where if a player transfers to another team, the team where the player transferred from is compensated for that player's departure and for the development that previous team had facilitated with that student. So I think some sort of compensation, whether it's a scholarship, reimbursement, or something along the lines of a financial reimbursement for that player's development, might be something to consider and be appropriate.
It's a fascinating issue, and one in which you're dancing around an array of issues. Not the least of one is the student athletes aren't employees, right?
Right.
And so that brings a host of legal issues into play. I'd inform or advise people, if they're not already aware, we have at least one state that is already beginning to wade into this issue, much as they did in name, image, and likeness. So now we've got governmental influences coming into play, which is going to drive the fact that we're going to have to reach some solutions both here and with NIL in the not too distant future. And I would say with both of these issues, and they are linked. I think Janet Cohn brought up several issues, whether it's in recruitment or within transfers, that NIL could play a role in it. It also presents some opportunities beyond the obvious things. It's going to present an opportunity for us as an association, for us as a membership, to come up with, hopefully, some very clear and definable rules and regulations that are understandable, that are fair, and that hopefully would build confidence in our ability to manage the field of intercollegiate athletics. It's teed up for us here. Now we either get it done, and if we do, that's great. If we don't, then state and federal government and others are going to come charging in.
Boy, I knew we could get the commissioner fired up. We got him back in talking. That's great. I thought the idea that Brad had would allow students the freedom to transfer, but it would also compensate the school from which they are leaving for the investment they had in recruiting that student and training them over a period of time. And wouldn't it be interesting if the school to which they transferred had to compensate the school from which they left with the value of that scholarship for 1 year? And that's an interesting, I don't know whether it's a demotivator, but I do think it's fair. And maybe that ought to go into the mix.
I believe it has been reviewed.
Hey, this is Randall, Senior Associate AD at Old Dominion University. To that point, would it be more prudent to maybe look at a model where not the team that they're leaving from is compensated, but the team that they're going to is penalized, in the sense that if you take on a student, say it's a full scholarship team, that instead of them, having that scholarship, they lose one scholarship. If that transfer is that important to them, then they may lose whatever percentage if it's an equivalency sport to that degree. Well, maybe that lowers the amount of places where these students have to go. So maybe they have to consider, is it really worth it to take on that student athlete? Because I think it would be quite difficult if you're looking to penalize even financially or whatever have you, a previous institution, especially if we're saying that we're not a professional business model.
Yeah. I think when you talk to the student athletes, they strongly oppose any sort of disincentive in the system. Okay, that's
right.
One issue to start with there. And it doesn't mean that's the only issue you take a look at. And then second, again, you start getting into what is the justification behind what you're doing and to whose benefit is. Ultimately, at the end of the day, hopefully our rules are for the benefit of the student athletes, right? Both in terms of their academic, athletic, and social development. And so you're going to have to somehow pull it into that, while at the same time, let's all acknowledge, and it's fair to acknowledge, and they're fair points of view, we have to balance student athlete interests with institutional interests and somehow mesh those. And that's where the rubber's meeting the road here.
Well, John, I'm glad you're the leader, because I know that the outcome will be productive. So thanks for chiming in on this. Any other thoughts on transfer policies before we move on? Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the financial sustainability and that going forward. If you have handy the document I sent yesterday, slide 16 lays out challenges that really will impact our ability to build a sustainable financial model going forward. Here's some factors that are impacting higher ed. And enrollment has declined 8 straight years in higher education. It's down 11%, fewer students. Student apathy toward college sports is at an all-time high. Attendance is really struggling with getting the students engaged. It was the lowest overall attendance in college football since 1996 in 2018. So even attendance at our games is going down. Institutional subsidies and student fees are under great stress. There are some great charts in the information sent you yesterday about how schools are funding their programs. And if you look at it at the lower levels of Division I, particularly FBS and FCS, the majority of funding is coming from student fees and from institutional support. And that includes, as probably most of the people on this call are at institutions that are dealing with that. That's a challenge. Those fees are going to be hard to grow. We've also got threats to the media model. The way of delivering technology today is changing vastly from how these contracts were negotiated 10 years or more ago. That was all based on a cable system, of delivery, but that's changing. Now, whether that means there'll be increased rights fees or the rights fees will be carved up and done differently, that's another question. It's a challenge that will impact building a financially sustainable model in the future. Staff sizes have grown enormously, both in football and basketball. Head coaches' salaries at the Power 5 level in the last 5 years have grown up 68%. So, you know, we're taking the money, particularly at the highest level, that we've been able to generate through better media contracts, the college football playoff, NCAA distributions, and we're spending it on things that are binding us for the future. Salaries with contracts, debt service on our many facility improvements. The median debt service for the Power 5 group is over $100 million with an annual debt service fee of about $10 million in the median. That's just now built into the budget, just like those coaches' salaries are. And now we've got the pandemic and the issues that are created around that. So given those as realities of the world in which we're living, what are your funding priorities now? What are they going to be? If you have to make cuts, where are you going to make them and where are you going to put your money? Let me hear from some of you about your thoughts about that.
Todd, you mentioned staff sizes. For those of us who haven't been in the industry quite as long as you have, put it into perspective with us. When you started at the University of Virginia in 1976, how many people were in the athletic department staff at UVA?
Well, this was a long time ago. Most of you weren't even born then, but I was, when I started at UVA, I started as the ticket manager. And I had a big roll of keys and I did everything including management of games. You did tickets, you did event management, you were there at night and closed up the gym. I mean, you did whatever you did. We had about 5 senior administrators. And I don't know, at that time, I guess we maybe had 24, 26 sports. And somehow we made it all work. But today, there were more people on a football staff than we had in the entire department at the University of Virginia in 1976. So, I mean, things have really grown beyond what you really need to function. Now, can you change it? I don't know. What are your thoughts about funding priorities?
We can go to Kevin Blue at UC Davis.
Yeah, Kevin, how are you? Glad.
Hey, Todd. Long-time listener, first-time caller here. I mean, I think that it's been interesting to study and observe the growth and expenses. But if you really study it, I think there's an inevitability to it because of how the economic system is structured, right? If you have athletic departments are nonprofit organizations, and as a result, all available revenue, even the revenue that's been generated at an increased rate from these media contracts in the last 10, 15 years, there's an incentive to spend it to compete, right? It's still a zero-sum competition trying to win. So since there's no profit incentive to operate at a profitable operating margin, people will spend as much as they can because part of their mission is to be competitively successful. So it's, to me, and I think some of you have seen, I've written a little bit about this before. I think the intervention in some way to restrict spending is maybe the only way to control it, given the way the system is currently configured, with nonprofit organizations competing in a zero-sum game to win. And with the revenue increases we've seen, it's going to translate into increased expenses.
Yeah. Kevin, and you've done a lot of thinking about this. How would you limit expenses?
Well, I think that there's ways that you could do it perhaps on a per sport basis. So, for example, if you're at FBS or Power 5 football, there can be an analysis done on what ought to be an overall budget number, operating budget number, perhaps inclusive of salaries. I know there's some antitrust concerns there, but and you can index that against cost of living, and you can index that against obviously you pull the scholarships out of the calculation, but there are ways to, I think, structure what is a an acceptable range of operating and staff salary budget on a sport by sport basis, using various cost of living metrics in various parts of the country to make it fair. And that's complicated, but there's a lot of things we do in college athletics that are very complicated. And I think that there are antitrust hurdles for sure, but I think that that's one of the only ways you can apply the brakes to the escalation in costs. The other way is revenue goes down, which we might see here because of the current economic situation. But ideally, in prosperous times, there would be a way to function with some fiscal restraint. But I think the only way to do that is regulations to some degree.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, a lot of talk in my circles about antitrust and what that would enable you to do. Maybe more importantly would be a more rigorous definition of who competes against one another. In other words, and this kind of gets to the federation question about not only football, but federation by budget size or federation by geography to give you a better chance to control your expenses relative to your real peers as opposed to those that may be aspirational. Maybe that's another way to deal with that. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And then I'll conclude by saying that I think that a lot of the, we've discussed on the call a lot of student athlete rights issues or advancement or progress. And I think the public yearning for advocacy on behalf of the student athletes is in large part driven by perceptions around the economics and the spending, and whether that's facilities or coaches' salaries or athletic director salaries or whatever you want to call it. And so at some point there has to be an ability to draw a line on transfer policy and NIL, et cetera. But it's very difficult to draw that line in today's optical climate, given the expense side of it. So controlling the expense side of it has second order effects that help control some of these other issues that we're trying to deal with now.
Yeah.
Todd, before moving to the next topic, we've got a comment from Wood Seelig at ODU and also Casey Seglis at Kent State. We'll start with Wood from ODU. Wood?
Yeah, I don't know about schools in other states, but in the Commonwealth of Virginia, there has been a bill that was passed, a legislative bill that caps student fees for athletics. And it may very well be in a number of other states. I'm not aware. I'm sure it is in some. But what that has done is it's kind of protected students on every campus with regard to the student fees that they pay in support of intercollegiate athletics. For example, here at Old Dominion, our student fee revenue for athletics cannot be greater than 55% of our overall revenue for athletics. And the way that 55% was derived, the non-Power 5 Division I schools, of which there were roughly 65 at the time, they took the average, the legislators in Virginia did the research and did the 65 school average revenue from those 65 for athletics and determined it to be about 55% of the overall revenue for those Division I intercollegiate programs around the country. So they tabbed us in that same vein as 55% for the non-Power 5s. At the time, we were at 72% of our overall athletic revenue was derived from student fees. So we had to quickly wean ourselves off of our reliance from the large majority of our budget from student fees to more self-generated revenue from donations and ticket sales and corporate sponsorships and conference revenue. So that is a factor that's out there. It's alive and well. Then they also, the state of Virginia, added a cap on any fee increase that cannot exceed 3% annually. So even if you were below that number and you wanted to say, well, let me expand that, you could only go up a total of 3% fees on any given year, which really restricts any kind of fee growth. And as students become, better consumers of education, they're starting to ask for the unbundled package like we do with our cable supplier. We don't want to pay for the 300 channels that we don't watch. We want to only pay for what we use. So students and their families are starting to ask for less fees and just charge me for what I might use from an auxiliary service. So we've got that element out there that exists and is alive and well. And then all of a sudden, the coronavirus hits. And so majority of us, except if you're in the Power Five, are really we're reliant on those student fees for a large percent of our existence. So, that's an important component. Then the coronavirus hits and it forces us to look at our revenues in the future, both from the NCAA with the men's basketball tournament, both from our conference distributions, enrollment decline potentially. As Todd said, 8 straight years of enrollment decline. It's almost certain it's going to be another year after the coronavirus. So we're projecting just on our campus alone a $40 to $50 million loss of revenue going forward next year. Athletics, we could be looking at a $3 to $4 million deficit, using about a 20% decline in self-generated revenue as a benchmark, just as a placeholder for our pro forma for next year. So I think what this means is we're all going to have to reevaluate, what are we doing with our resources? Have we outgrown our resources? Are we sponsoring too many sports? Are we overpaying salaries, coaches, administration? Are there different ways that we can do business? And I think we have to look at it in 3 ways. Institutionally, what can we do? As a conference, how can we get assistance from our conference? And then nationally, what kind of legislation can we propose or request nationally? And just for the sake of discussion, why, for example, for FBS membership, does it have to be a minimum of 16 sports sponsorship? Could that not be reduced to 12? And for FCS, instead of 14, maybe that's 10. So I think we have to ask, can we continue to be all things to everyone and sponsor all the sports that we're sponsoring? Or do we at some point have to scale back and maybe even take some sports to a need-based or academic scholarship only, and get away from some of the scholarship model that we're on? Because 2/3 of our overall expenses within our athletic program are salaries and scholarships. That's 67% of our total expense. So the only way you're going to really control your expenses are in those 2 line items for the most part. So that's where I think we've got to get creative and drill down on how we can change the model, because it is, for most of us, unsustainable.
Wow. It's nice though that the state of Virginia solved all your problems.
Yeah, they were the tip of the iceberg on that one.
Interestingly, Kevin mentioned the fact that other governmental agencies are looking at ways to control spending, and that's certainly something that might be picked up elsewhere. I really think your comments about being creative and deciding where you're really going to put your priorities are very topical, very important, and timely. Casey, you wanted to add something?
I did. Wood took all my thunder. Since I worked for him for a couple of years, I feel like, it's okay that, because I was going to say the exact same stuff he would. Just at Kent State, with enrollment going down and student fees and us taking a hit, over the past few years, we've taken anywhere from $500,000 to $650,000 each year, a cut to our budget. And, like Wood talked about with this virus and the financial implications there, I think it's going to devastatingly affect our budget, and there's no question about it. And we're not in a position at Kent State with the amount of programs we have. We can't cut really any program at this point, and either we come in an issue with Title IX, or we go below that threshold that the NCAA has provided. And so I think it's really it's looking at the NCAA and saying, is there a way we can lower the number of sports that we need in order to participate? Because if not, I just don't. It's not sustainable, and I don't think we can. I don't think it ever was sustainable. But I think this issue that we're going through right now as a nation and as a world, I think it's really going to spearhead the future of college athletics, just in my opinion.
Yeah, we are at a very critical point in our time, and I think the pandemic has put a spotlight on that. In the interest of time, and try to get through a couple of other things, and I do appreciate all those comments. I want to talk briefly about football and maybe a line of demarcation that might be considered in the future that would take the pressures off of those at schools like Kent State or Old Dominion, to try to recalibrate your scope and your goals and objectives. But in order to do that, I think it's important to point out the vast financial differences between those that are operating at the highest level and those, and the majority of the rest that are operating sort of in a different sphere. You only have to look at the revenues that were generated by the college football playoff and the postseason bowl games to understand the dominance of football in our financial modeling going forward, in particular for the schools that are playing at the Power 5 level. Let me give you these numbers. You might want to write them down. Last year, or in the year 2019, postseason football, including the college football playoff and all of the bowl games, generated $647 million. And those dollars were distributed to the participants that are sponsoring the sport of football. The Power 5 group of that $647 million distributed to their group $536 million of that $647. If you compare that to what the NCAA is distributing for the men's basketball tournament, this is before it was canceled, this is in 2019, the total amount was $590 million, and that was distributed to the 353 schools that currently sponsor Division I basketball on the men's side. Of that $590 million, $240 million of it went to the Power 5 group, so almost 50%. So as you can see, those that are at schools like, in the ACC or the Big Ten or whatever, are really dealing with a different level of resource than others. And so the question would be, going forward, does that lend itself to a new governance model, the federation possibly not only of football, but maybe even the split off of those schools that have those kinds of resources? And what does that do for you on your campuses in the way of selling that to your institutions if you're not, or selling that to your supporters if you are not one of those that are able to fund it at a high level? I just leave that, open that up for a little bit of discussion before we get to the coronavirus. Thoughts on that disparity and how you're going to manage that in the future? There's the slide that I just was referencing that shows you where the dollars were spent for those two entities.
Todd, we can go to John Diffley at St. John's.
John, good afternoon.
It was a really good conversation. Thank you, Todd. I was going back before you get to this piece. It was just, hearing about the sports sponsorship. I know we talk a lot about being in, student athlete welfare, kid business and whatnot. It's just, it's it's concerning to hear, the sports are up there right away, and understand that the economic implications of this upcoming, pandemic virus or whatnot. Just hopefully, we keep that in the forefront. We see some elevated salaries, elevated revenues, elevated facility developments, and then on the back end, we're cutting sports. But I appreciate everyone's comments. Very, very insightful, and thank you. So,
Hey, John, personally, I have a same concern. I think one of the great things that college athletics has done, we talked about this earlier, is provide a considerable opportunity for a widely diverse group of students to get a college education and have some of that paid for through their participation. When you drop sports, you eliminate those opportunities. And isn't that the business that we're in? So I would encourage those of you who are going to be leaders in the future to do all that you can to protect the opportunity that exists for students to get their education through athletics. And we've got to figure out some way to pay for all that. So that's really an issue. And I guess the question that I'm going to go back to what I was talking about, would you feel better if there was a brighter line of demarcation between the competitive groups that's financially driven as opposed to historically driven or sport by sport driven? What's the thought about that?
We can go to Mike Kessel at Georgia Tech.
Good. Hey, Mike, go ahead.
Hey, it's me again. Yeah, I was thinking, just as much as you're talking about the finances and the different things that separate the clear delineation, specifically in football, between different programs, and you're talking about the haves and the have-nots. You said, how would we sell this to our supporters of kind of segmenting things out a little bit more clearly? I think it's also important to talk about the competition, right? When I know, I'm at Georgia Tech, and when our schedule comes out, the fans are craving on the football level. They want to play other schools that are Power 5 schools, and I think the reception would be if people were grouped a little bit more closely together based on competition and competitive level for football. That could be a positive in that. But on the other side, when you look at basketball, one of the best parts of March Madness is the fact that you really feel like anybody could beat anybody. So that's where, it's not such a clear delimitator in terms of competition, because it's just a little bit different there when you feel like everybody's got a shot to beat everybody. But yeah, I would think that the splitting up of groupings based on economics and whatnot could probably also fit pretty well with the competitiveness on the field in regards to football.
Yeah, Mike, thanks. My own personal opinion is I think football will fade. I just think it's inevitable almost. And by that, I mean the Power 5 group will run their own football operation. They may or may not take on the responsibility of the stewardship of other football levels. But I do think at some point, because of the great disparity in facilities and salaries and budget and operations, they will pull away and create their own organization. Because currently, the only thing the NCAA provides to support football is legislative services, enforcement, and eligibility analysis, that type of thing. The NCAA has no participation in the division of the revenues that come from college football. Yet, interestingly, if you look at the NCAA's distribution model for funds from the NCAA basketball tournament, calculations oftentimes include the sport of football in determining how much your school gets for, the number of scholarships you sponsor, the number of sports that you sponsor. I mean, there's a football factor in the distribution of NCAA money when, in fact, football is not contributing a dime to that money being distributed. So if you are to pull football out, that again becomes a separator that motivates the football group to say, look, we're tired of dealing with giving some of our money to the NCAA or whatever, and we're going to go do our own thing. So
let's go to Mark Benson at Albany.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Todd, how are you?
How are things in New York?
It's snow on the ground, believe it or not, and we're indoors a lot. So appreciate this opportunity to, as my good friend Wood said earlier, to learn a little bit, and this is really helpful. My comment on the football piece is, as an FCS institution, losing the opportunity for those guarantee games would really have a really negative impact on our budget, as it's kind of baked in from year to year as part of that. So it would be just another chance to widen that gap financially. And I think in terms of selling the other piece of it to our fans, we kind of already do. I think at our level, we're in the Colonial Athletic Association, and we use that to leverage the excitement among our fan base, because it's a generally well-respected FCS league. So that would just be my comments on that. And just, it feels like every topic that we hit, if you're a school like the vast majority of us, it's a negative budget impact, negative budget impact. But it's our reality. And I think I left a budget meeting this morning with our president and vice president of finance that was scheduled a couple of months ago, but it really just turned into, what are we going to do moving forward with this virus? And I think Wood mentioned 50 million. Conservatively here, we're thinking it's 20 to 25 million dollars just in this year. So, something that this is a very timely, helpful discussion. So I appreciate that. Just want to share my comment.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. We can't forget that there is, the FCS group and others do use those guarantees to run your program. So it's a complicated issue about football and the money and how to deal with all that. But you did tee up going into the coronavirus, and we got about maybe 10 or 15 more minutes if you can stay with us. I really want to go to Kyle Brennan. Kyle is in Utah. We asked him if he would be willing to talk a little about their planning and their reaction to what could happen in the fall if football is impacted in some way. So Kyle, are you on the line? Can you speak to us about that?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
You can.
All right, thank you. It's my first time using Zoom on a cell phone, so I'm glad it's working. I'm kind of technology challenged sometimes. It's crazy. We don't have all the answers here at Utah. It's changing as fast as it is everywhere else. In fact, during this call, I got a text from our AD saying that summer school is now going to be online. So just as an example, how is that going to impact, weightlifting, academic support? Are these guys going to have an acclimatization period and get ready for the season? All unknowns at this point. So it's totally a different environment that we're in. We noticed that the Olympics was canceled a couple days ago, I think, or Monday. And so that precipitated us here trying to get things together as far as projecting how football, canceling it or reduction in interest would impact our school. So we've just started on that process. Don't have all of our numbers together yet, but we're doing a forecast from all the way from having no football to some of the items that were mentioned earlier about a reduction in the percentage of revenue that we're going to bring in based on a lot of different factors with our donors and with even sponsors not having the kind of financial freedom and ability that they used to have going into this season. So a lot of that's just going to change from different angles. So we're looking to try and figure that out. One piece of Utah that's a little unique is that we're doing a South End Zone project right now. And this virus has threatened our pro forma. So our pro forma has a certain percentage of those seats selling, and that's going to be part of what's funding the project. So for us, that's an unknown that we're going to have to look into as well. Right now as a conference, we're looking at a drop dead date for spring ball, for example. I don't know what other conferences are doing, but we've asked our coaches, for example, if June is when we can kick off again, is spring ball even something that we're going to do? Are we going to have practices in June? So there's so many logistical things I think we got to look on. We're also looking to engage our fans while still being sensitive to what they're going through. So encouraging our coaches and our student athletes to get out into the community, on social media, reach out to everyone, talk about staying home, the importance of being vigilant about the virus. And I think one of the bigger things, I guess, to wrap it up, that we're looking at is looking at all the money that we may have saved, we'll see from spring. So we've got all these teams that didn't compete, didn't have a championship, which has been really hard on our student athletes and on our coaches, but there's some savings that have happened there. And do we take those savings, put them right back into the program on things they need right now, or do we hold on to that money with the idea that football may not be here or there may be a financial impact in the fall? So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about here at Utah. Don't have all the answers. Like I said, we just kind of started this process in the last couple of days, but any information anyone else has on what they're projecting would be great. We don't really know the answer right now, but we want to take a stab at it.
Great, Kyle. Hey, thanks. If Commissioner Steinbrecher is on the phone, you know, John, I think you told me that you'd had biweekly or twice a week conversations with your ADs. What's the general opinion about the going forward issues as it relates to this for the fall?
Much like you just heard, and as you would guess, way more questions than answers. So we're going down a couple paths right now. One is trying to manage the remainder of the year, and the other is trying to project forward, taking into account the array of factors that will impact the financials. And so whether it's straightforward, you heard a really good layout of an array of football issues. When could you start practice again? How would we manage that, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it goes into looking, in our case, we're going to end up looking at essentially everything we do to operate as a league. How do you run championships? How do you run regular seasons? How do you essentially anything a conference does that we do collectively, we'll look at. And are there ways that, right now we run conference championships in every sport. Do we need to do that? Or should it just be regular season championships? Should we change how we operate our regular season? Do you need a regular season conference play? Some sports you most definitely do. In other sports, do you or don't you? Do we change the size of conference championships going forward? Where are we hosting those championships? I've jokingly said I'm waiting for someone to bring up we need to go back to 6 football officials and 2 basketball officials. I think essentially anything could be on the table to look at how do we operate efficiently and effectively, and then the question beyond that is this a one-year solution, or is this a to be determined or unto further notice solution?
John, I don't envy you having to do that. We're nearing the end of our time. I want to take an old guy's prerogative who's been doing this for a long time, and I want to encourage you, all of you who are in the decision-making tree, about how to deal with challenges like the ones we've discussed today, but in particular the most immediate one, which is about how to react to the pandemic and how that impacts your students. I would point you back to whatever your core values may be. And if student athlete well-being is one of them, and even your top core value, I would hope that you would have the courage and the discipline to ensure that whatever adjustments you made, first and foremost, took into account its impact upon your students. And that not only includes their health, but also their access to an opportunity. So I think it would be important for every institution, every conference, to sit down and say, okay, what do we value most? What are our priorities? And given those, what sacrifices are we willing to make in areas that have the least impact on those parts of our enterprise that we value the most? And from my training and the upbringing I had in the industry, the many privileges I was given, the well-being and opportunities for students were the reasons that we had our jobs, and we needed to make sure that we did the best we could to provide those for them. So in this trying time, I would like to leave you with that thought. I would also say one other thing, then I'm going to turn this over to Brad Bates for a final comment. This is possibly an opportunity for an athletic department to create and maintain and promote the value of athletics to campus in a different way. to provide leadership, to provide courage, to do things that are tough, but do them centered on the values that that really tell you what athletics is really all about. The money's important, but it's not really all about the money. It's really about the experience. So this is an opportunity for you as leaders on your campus to create a different opinion about why you exist and what you do. So with that, I'll ask my colleague Brad Bates if he'd make a few final comments, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, real quick. And first of all, thanks to everyone for participating today. Really enjoyed the dialogue. Obviously, our campuses have tremendous challenges. From what I've read, the vaccine's a year away. And I don't know a lot of people that are going to rush to stadiums to sit with 60,000 people when there's no vaccine yet. Kyle had mentioned summer school is all going remote on their campus. I can see this crisis being having a substantial increase in remote learning on most campuses, which impacts your university's revenues because room and board goes away, not to mention your student attendance. So in a worst case scenario, there are going to be dire consequences for college athletics, many of which we've talked about today. But also with that, and Todd started to allude to this, comes opportunities. Out of crisis comes the opportunity to alter the course of college athletics. So never in my lifetime has there been a chance to take a step back, hit pause, and see where we can make changes that make sense relative to our overarching values. The last thing I'll say is this series of webinars is in sequence. We're talking about transitioning into leadership and athletic director roles next week. And the following one will then be on strategic planning. We want to build from the foundation on today's discussion into the next two. And finally, Clay, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to send you an opportunity to give us feedback. We want to provide you with what is meaningful. And so we hope you'll be honest and give us good suggestions and feedback based on today. Thank you for your time.
Brad, thank you. And thank you, everyone. It's been our pleasure to be with you today. We hope this has been helpful to you. Again, we'll start with the critical questions. I mean, what's the future hold? How is your institution going to be impacted? What's going to be your role? And then finally, how can you secure your position and future within the enterprise? We hope this is helpful in you thinking through that. And we'll look forward to being with you next week. Have a great day.